Scandinavia is an interesting market, especially for electric vehicles, since Scandinavia is considered the most progressive in the way they think of the climate and the planet as a whole. Scandinavia is actually one of Tesla's largest markets, especially when you take the population into account. Try and take a look at Norway, for example, who has the highest density of Teslas per capita of any country. Not limited to Scandinavia, but the entire world. But even though there lie great opportunities in Scandinavia, it also holds some unique challenges to overcome if Tesla and their competitors are to succeed there. But as you may know, Scandinavia includes 3 countries: Denmark, Sweden, and Norway. And even though these countries might look similar to someone viewing it from the outside, I can, as a Dane, confidently say that these 3 countries have some very interesting challenges that differ drastically according to which country we are talking about, although I believe they can all be connected to the overall problem Tesla has in Scandinavia. So in this video, I will show you what these problems are, why Tesla is facing them, and most importantly, how they overcome them. Also, only a small percentage of people who watch my videos are actually subscribed. So if you end up liking this video, consider subscribing, it's free and you can always change your mind. Okay, so even though I personally live in Denmark, I must say when it comes to EVs, Norway definitely has gotten the most news coverage. And for good reasons. Norway's battery electric vehicle sales, or BEV sales, account for 61.5% of the country's total vehicle market in September of this year, which makes sense, as Norway plans to only have new cars sold that are EVs by 2025. But the reason EV sales account for such a large slice of the entire market isn't down to just their aspiration to become carbon neutral, it's more so down to the favorable tax incentives as well as the rather interesting and unusual perks that Norwegians get when buying an EV. These include no annual road tax, access to bus lanes, company car tax reduction of 40%, no purchase/import taxes, exemption from 25% value-added tax on purchase, and parking fee discounts. All of this means that a Model 3 in Norway costs around $42,000, which is dirt cheap compared to a similar car that would cost the same as the Model 3 without taxes, but when you add taxes it costs twice as much. So it isn't surprising that with so many incentives for buying an EV, many Norwegians have decided to do it. And that has greatly played into Tesla's hands. Well, at least for now, because these incentives will not last forever. And as it currently stands, the exemption from the value-added tax will expire this year. And for those that don't know, the value-added tax in Norway is 25%, which doesn't seem like a large enough of a percentage to shift the whole market to ICE vehicles. But looking at this calculation that compares an e-Golf to a regular Golf, we can see that the e-Golf is only 800 euros cheaper than the regular Golf with all the incentives. But if you add the 25% value-added tax to the e-Golf, suddenly it becomes 7,500 euros more than the regular Golf, which is incredibly significant for such a low price vehicle. And even though the value-added tax makes a big difference on its own, there are more vital changes lurking in the coming years. Norway's current government has decided to keep the remaining incentives for electric vehicles until late 2021. But even though it is unlikely that these incentives are getting completely removed, they will at the very least be revised and or adjusted, which in Tesla's case could be devastating, as they don't offer any vehicle that is considered affordable enough for the vast majority of Norwegians, especially when taxes get applied. So if Tesla wants to stay as a dominant player in the Norwegian market, they either need to depend on the regulators to rule in their favor, or they will need to create a car that is quite a bit cheaper before or during 2022 to not lose significant market share to competitors. Although Tesla is already beginning to lose some market share in the Norwegian market, as Volkswagen's ID.3 has now come out and the ID.4 is also starting to arrive there. But if you are into cars, you would know that the ID.3 and the ID.4 are in pretty much all cases inferior vehicles compared to the Model 3, except for one small detail: the price. You see, car buyers won't just buy the car that is the best value for their money, because they can't buy a car that costs more than what they have. So many will choose the inferior option, as the barrier to purchase is much lower, which in Tesla's case is a great challenge to overcome, as they repeatedly have admitted to having vehicles that are too expensive. But sometimes consumers will look past the price, as well as the other vital factors that make a vehicle desirable, although they will only do this in very specific circumstances, and that is where Sweden comes into play. You see, in Sweden they have this automaker named Volvo, and unsurprisingly, Swedes love Volvos. So much so that the two best-selling vehicles in Sweden are from Volvo. And the reason for that can partly be attributed to the fact that Europeans, and especially Scandinavians, perceive European-made cars as higher quality than American cars. And in Sweden's case, they perceive Volvos as being a better and higher quality vehicle, not only because it's made in Sweden, but because it's a Swedish brand. And I can't speak for Norway here, but I know that here in Denmark, we have an old saying for what a good life should be. That includes a Volvo. It's Villa, Volvo, Vose. And this saying basically means that if you have these three things, you are doing well in your life. Fortunately for Tesla though, this saying is mostly set in irony these days, and Volvos aren't perceived the same way anymore. But in Sweden, Volvos still are perceived largely the same way they always have been. So if Tesla wants to compete in the Swedish market for real, they somehow need to beat Volvo and convince the Swedes that Teslas are superior vehicles. But one thing is for certain, Tesla won't be able to do that with cars that are made in the United States. Because as you may remember, we do not think highly of American-made cars in Scandinavia. And if Tesla would keep importing cars from the United States, they would always be at a disadvantage considering the transportation fees alone. So how do you solve that? Well, the most obvious answer would be to build a factory in a part of Europe that is close to Tesla's most vital and crucial markets, including Scandinavia and Germany, which is exactly what they're already doing. Now sure, the reason they are building this factory in Europe has more advantages and reasons than those we have already talked about, but its importance for the Europeans' perception of the build quality of Teslas cannot be denied. So I believe this move was the right one for Tesla. But let's move on to the last country, and I have been patiently waiting for this, because it's my home country, Denmark. Now, I have lived here my whole life, and I can confidently say that when it comes to EVs in Scandinavia, we are lagging behind quite a bit from our neighbors. But let me first explain what the tax situation on electric vehicles looks like, so you can get a better understanding of where we stand. So in 2016, 17, 18, 19 and 2020, there has been no registration fees on any EV if it is cheaper than 400,000 Danish kroner. And on top of that, the mandatory value-added tax of 25% for all goods and services sold in Denmark is also added. All other vehicles are required to pay an 85% registration fee up to around 200,000 Danish kroner, and any car more expensive than that, you pay a 150% registration fee, and on top of that, you obviously also have to pay the 25% value-added tax. So, as you can see, EVs have actually been quite heavily subsidized by the Danish government so far. And in theory, the subsidies should have made EVs a more viable option. But surprisingly, electric vehicles only account for around 2.5% of all vehicles sold here in Denmark. So what went wrong? Well, that question can actually be quite complicated to answer, but what I have noticed is that as soon as there are any articles or news about electric vehicles, and Tesla in particular, people are quick to criticize one thing in particular. And to show you what I mean, let's go to a social media platform that you may have used before, Facebook. Danes actually still use this platform, believe it or not, and our elderly, as well as our middle-aged men and women, are diligently using it to comment on articles like these. Now, I chose these two articles specifically, as they are from the same news publisher, and therefore we can take a look at how people respond to both negative as well as positive news regarding EVs within the same group. So let's take a look at the comment section and see what people think. Electric cars are too expensive. It's only the upper middle class and upwards that have the means to purchase them. The normal people, those who are in the middle class, do not. That message is from Peter, and as you can see, 88 people agreed with him, and someone even replied, "So true," to his comment. And to understand his comment, here are some statistics of how wealthy we Danes are. The average Dane earns around $51,000 a year, and we also have an average net worth of around $300,000. Of that $300,000, we have around $32,000 in cash. We know that Tesla's Model 3 costs around $60,000, so it could be a real possibility that it is purely down to the cost of the vehicle, as Peter was saying in his comment. But if you are wondering what the others were saying, well, they said the exact same thing. And it didn't matter what the context of the article was, as it seems none had actually read it, which I can't say was surprising. But for many Danes, Tesla's vehicles just aren't viable options, even though we are one of the highest income countries in the world and we have favorable subsidies for electric vehicles. But the worst is yet to come. As it currently stands, if nothing is changed by the regulators in Denmark, the registration fees on electric vehicles will go up from 20% to 65% in 2021, but it doesn't end there. In 2022, it will be raised to 90%, and finally in 2023, it will be raised to 100%. And that could be devastating for Tesla. But what I didn't tell you was that the articles I just mentioned were about the new plan our current government is proposing regarding the registration fees and taxes on electric vehicles. The plan emphasizes subsidies for cheaper electric vehicles, and it will make it more expensive to buy luxury electric vehicles. But if it goes through and becomes reality, Tesla's Model 3 will actually stay at the same price, although the Model S and X will see an increase in price of around 30%. So the challenge for Tesla is regulators, and they are out of Tesla's hands, but luckily for them, Scandinavia is actually very keen on going electric, and the likelihood of Denmark, Sweden and Norway keeping their favorable tax incentives, or even making them more favorable than they already are, is very high, at least in the short term. But as we have seen in Denmark in particular, favorable registration fees and taxes aren't enough to make Teslas the most obvious choice for us Danes, as we simply cannot afford to purchase them, even with the subsidies. And in Norway we saw that an added value-added tax on EVs could make the regular Golf be more attractive to buyers than the e-Golf currently is, which also applies to Tesla's vehicles. And in Sweden we see Tesla has to compete both on price, prestige and quality with the likes of Volvo, which is something that even German automakers haven't been particularly successful at, except for maybe Volkswagen. But what all of this comes down to is Tesla's Scandinavia problem, which is the way our countries run. You see, Denmark, Sweden and Norway are all high-income, high-tax countries by heart, and they all thrive on pursuing equality. Not only that, they are also all considered leaders in the transition to sustainable energy. Although the reason we are leaders in sustainable energy is because we sacrifice taxes for a bigger goal, which is to become carbon neutral, which in my humble opinion should be the goal for all countries, not just Scandinavian countries. We will sacrifice short-term income on registration fees for cars if that can make the cars on the road change from gas and diesel to electric. And this has been a great opportunity for Tesla so far, but their reign in Scandinavia could soon be over, because the low registration fees and taxes on EVs aren't here to stay. They are only short-term measures to convert the fleet into electric. In the long term, we need to tax electric vehicles, otherwise we won't have the income needed to continue supporting our government spending on education, healthcare, infrastructure and so on. Gas and diesel cars will likely become illegal to purchase, or at the very least be taxed so heavily they won't be viable options for any average Scandinavian to run or purchase. So the sooner the Scandinavian governments remove the subsidies for EVs, the sooner the Danes, Swedes and Norwegians will have to go to inferior but cheaper options from other competing automakers, as those will be the only cars they can actually afford. Unless of course if Tesla can either reduce the cost of their vehicles drastically or create a car that is vastly cheaper than their current models, which we know they will, but whether or not they will be able to do that in time before all the incentives will be changed or removed will be interesting to see. And that is Tesla's Scandinavia problem.